protagonist of this tale is a young man who led a calm and uneventful life working as a doctor. Throughout the long nights, he meticulously transcribed medical texts, working tirelessly by candlelight until dawn signaled the arrival of a new day. Before breakfast was served, preparations were completed to welcome the patients scheduled for that day. As he prepared for the day, he took time to review the important acupuncture points on his own body, practicing their identification with careful focus. Life unfolded for them in quiet, unchanging patterns. One day, his father cared for a young patient with such tenderness that the child experienced no discomfort at all. Believed that his father's remarkable abilities as a doctor had been shaped by the calm and peaceful lifestyle he led. Marveled at his father's incredible skill in acupuncture, impressed by how gentle and precise his touch was, like a butterfly settling softly on someone's skin. Watching him work, couldn't help but question whether he would ever be able to match such expertise. After informing his father that he needed to gather more herbs, made his way along the lively town streets. The townspeople welcomed him with friendly smiles, addressing him by name, inquiring about his well-being, and even sharing pieces of meat with him as he passed by. While he wandered along, his mind preoccupied, and his eyes fixed on a nearby band of warriors, he unexpectedly collided forcefully with a person standing ahead of him. As he raised his head to discover what was blocking his path, he came nose to nose with a towering man whose fierce eyes silently demanded an explanation for his careless wandering. Quickly expressed regret to the towering man, openly accepting responsibility for the mistake. Despite hearing the apology, the man remained unconvinced and warned that perhaps someone should step in to show him the consequences of his actions. Suddenly, he experienced a jolt of pain as something struck him. Even after this event, thoughts of becoming a hero continued to echo in his mind. Later on, when he arrived with his eyes swollen, his friend Guak, who was a 20-year-old known for gathering herbs, burst into laughter at the sight. Stared in disbelief at the sight of his injured friend. Rather than offering comfort, he teased him, suggesting that he should have requested a punch to his other eye as well, so both would look the same. He kept mocking him, joking in a sarcastic tone about whether he wanted a second black eye so he could resemble a panda. Overwhelmed by the constant mockery, abruptly reached out and jabbed his friend's eye. The person yelped in both pain and shock, pleading for him to cease his actions. Once the chaos subsided, the pair of friends settled down side by side. Wondered aloud if he might be hungry, then kindly suggested picking up something tasty for them to eat. He reached into his bag and pulled out a sizable red mushroom, its surface patterned with marks that looked like luminous blue butterflies. Anger flared as he questioned whether was mocking him, while growing anxious, quickly explained that the mushroom was, in fact, quite costly. He proceeded to clarify that the mushroom possessed unique properties, allowing whoever consumed it to experience an extraordinary type of dream. Caught off guard, wondered aloud about the specific dreams being mentioned. He explained that the dreams offered him visions of rising to the status of King of Kings, or achieving the wisdom of a transcendent sage. Went on with excitement, recalling how the previous time he tasted it, he had a dream where he became the greatest martial arts master. She managed to overcome more than 100 opponents, experiencing each moment with a vivid sense of reality. His friend explained that the mushroom's poison was harmless to people. As his friend became absorbed in the tale, quickly ate the whole mushroom without hesitation. Stared in disbelief, raising his voice as he scolded for finishing the entire portion. Remaining composed, inquired about the issue. His concern evident, clarified that since even one bite could grant someone a dream of becoming an elite martial artist, consuming the entire mushroom might lead to dangerous results. The mushroom quickly took hold of, causing him to imagine himself as a sword master whose movements and weapon flowed together as if they were a single entity. He boldly announced his unwavering intention to become the soul, his voice echoing with determination. Regarded the other man with a mixture of disbelief and amusement, mentally labeling him a fool. He marveled at how rapidly the changes were taking place, and concluded that whatever happened to his own body was no longer his concern. Claimed to have the skills of a doctor, insisting he could understand things simply by observing them, but did not believe his assertion. Following that moment, chose to be patient, observing quietly as events began to play out. He turned to glance over his shoulder, only to find something unexpected waiting behind him. His health took an abrupt turn for the worse. With a shaky tone, he insisted once more that he was a doctor, just as his sight blurred and transformed into a dreamlike world where luminous butterflies drifted all around him. Drifted into a profound sleep, slipping quietly into the world of dreams. He discovered that he had become an elderly, powerful blacksmith renowned for his legendary skills. Sparks danced through the air, fluttering gently against Tang's skin like delicate butterflies. As he worked, he reflected on his lifelong journey as a blacksmith, marveling at how each joyful moment in his craft continued to fill him with wonder. Within the depths of his dream, he realized he was inhabiting the form of the famed blacksmith. However, bewilderment swept over him upon hearing the name Tang, which he immediately rejected, instead boldly insisting that he was renowned as the greatest master blacksmith in all the world. For a brief instant, experienced the sensation of awakening from a light sleep, puzzled by the odd dream in which he imagined himself as a doctor. However, he soon shrugged off the idea, attributing it to simple tiredness. Summoned his resolve, declaring his intention to craft the 5 fabled blades sought by the king of Yue. He promised that these creations would surpass all his previous achievements, declaring that he would dedicate himself completely to their perfection, determined to honor his renowned reputation. The 5 extraordinary swords, known as And, emerged into view. Shankayan stood side by side. Over the course of 2 decades, had been crafted into a masterpiece, the result of a harmonious collaboration between human skill and the power of the heavens. The moment transformed into an extravagant celestial festivity. It was revealed that once had completed both the wishes of humankind and the mandates set by the heavens. He would be received among the immortals as one of their own. Like the beings who dwelled in the heavens, ready to honor his entrance into paradise, they the celestial peach wine for the celebration. Without warning, the setting trembled before disappearing completely. Opened his eyes and realized he was sprawled on the ground. Nearby, the raised, irritated voice of a man rang out, questioning in disbelief how anyone could claim this particular doctor was the finest in all of Chengdu. Inside the clinic, a government official silently resolved to force the inexperienced doctor, whose acupuncture skills were lacking, into early retirement. Once the official had finished, he exited the area and departed. Guok, standing next to him, quietly grumbled his belief that people in government positions were always foolish. Slowly rose to his feet, his head throbbing painfully, as he turned to his friend with a puzzled expression, trying to understand what had taken place. He responded with astonishment, noting that a significant amount of time had gone by, and that the sun had already disappeared below the horizon. He recounted how, while affected by the mushroom, he had spoken nonsense, introducing himself as, and declaring his intention to craft legendary swords. Without warning, he became determined to head back to the clinic, pulling his companion with him, and later remarked on how fortunate they were to have made it there unharmed. Before departing, requested that keep the mushroom a secret from his father. Nodded in agreement and expressed his gratitude. Stepped into the clinic, his mind swirling with uncertainty about whether his earlier experience had been real or simply a figment of his imagination. He expressed regret to his father for arriving late, mentioning that he had stopped to gather some herbs on the way. His father's attention was fixed on a needle, so he failed to realize that his son had come back. Said the same thing again. He inquired about the individual who had recently departed. A sudden piercing pain shot through his head. A peculiar and intense surge of frustration swept over him, leaving him utterly bewildered about where it had come from. Noticing the worry on his son's face, the father expressed concern and wondered if anything was wrong. The son quickly reassured him that everything was all right, but his curiosity got the better of him as he inquired about the identity of the man who had just departed. His father told him that the visitor served as the governor's military escort and had mentioned that the acupuncture session was unusually painful. The father wondered if the discomfort was due to the new needles, which appeared to be a bit thicker compared to the previous ones. However, thought this was odd, since he had inspected the needles earlier that day and hadn't noticed any issues. The father lifted both an old, bent needle and a shiny new one, showing the difference between them. He explained that he had purchased the new needles 2 weeks earlier since the old ones were no longer straight. Just then, announced that an unusual noise seemed to be coming from the needles. By evening, a new noise filled the air, one that had been absent earlier that day. A surge of uncontrollable frustration swept through him, leaving him powerless against its intensity. He began to shout, insisting that the sound was more than he could tolerate. He recognized the noise as the rhythmic pounding of a blacksmith's hammer, a powerful sound known to stir heroes from their slumber. Reached for a fresh needle, determination blazing in his eyes. He silently questioned how anyone could refer to such an object as a needle. Became aware that a shift had occurred inside himself. Whenever he encountered anything that lacked quality, a powerful wave of anger would surge through him. All at once, he found himself capable of telling the difference between expertly made work and shoddy construction. He had only gained this ability the day before. With this newfound understanding, he began to view his surroundings as insignificant and valueless, and the realization almost pushed him to the brink of insanity. He discovered that his sole comfort came from gazing at an ancient needle crafted by the blacksmith. He considered it to be Sichuan's greatest source of pride. He felt a wave of confusion as he questioned internally how the other person could possibly know so much. The new needles, though supposedly crafted by the same blacksmith, appeared oddly different and of much quality. Concerned that his condition could be something severe, he hurried over to the blacksmith workshop. Upon stepping into the workshop, he surveyed his surroundings. He noticed an assortment of tools laid out before him. The moment he grasped the expertly crafted tool, a sense of calm washed over him, dissolving his irritation completely. He picked up the sword, holding it close with admiration, his intense praise for the weapon startling someone who happened to walk by. He began to question whether his aspiration to become was to blame. He wondered whether the dream had given him the knowledge of a skilled professional. With only a brief look, he could immediately understand the core of expertly created masterpieces. At first, dismissed the suggestion, believing it could never be done. He found it unreasonable to believe that someone could master a whole skill simply by dreaming about it. In the end, he realized that only by seeking answers on his own could he satisfy his curiosity. So he made up his mind to visit the blacksmith directly and uncover what truly happened to him. When reached the smithy, he expressed his dissatisfaction with the new needle to the blacksmith's son, Gi-sung. Gi-sung's anger boiled over as he insisted that, even though he lacked his father's level of talent, he had dedicated 2 decades to mastering this craft and deserved to be recognized for his experience rather than dismissed as a beginner. Made it clear that he had never claimed Gi-sung was unskilled. After considering the situation, it became clear that the senior blacksmith must have stepped down from his work. It seemed as if the bright sun itself had crafted the new needle. Gi-sung couldn't shake the sting of humiliation. He recognized that matching his father's accomplishments was no easy task, yet it pained him that even the staff at the clinic now regarded him with condescension. He mockingly suggested that try to spot his father's creations among the displayed pieces, implying doubt in his ability to succeed. He also reflected on the qualities he did not possess that his father had. She assumed he would remain unaware of any changes. To Gi-sung's surprise, wasted no time and confidently selected every single piece created by his father. The realization hit him hard, leaving him in shock as he questioned whether the contrast between his own efforts and his father's was truly that apparent. Gi-sung acknowledged that Mu-jin's perceptiveness was truly remarkable. Felt completely certain that his dream was extraordinary because of the genuine reply he received. His demeanor shifted dramatically as he expressed that he finally grasped the reason behind his disappointment with the needle he had crafted. Had skillfully chosen each item that his father had made, demonstrating a keen eye for detail. He began to suspect that this person's understanding could potentially exceed his. Gi-sung realized that if he kept shaping himself in the same way, his efforts would never rise above average, leading him to conclude that a single path remained open to him. Realized that if he wanted something, he would have to create it on his own. He extended the hammer toward who stared at it in disbelief, paused, considering his next move, explained that if the other person refused, he would have no choice but to endure the needles had prepared. Decided to give it a shot, realizing this might be his only chance to experience what it was like to be a blacksmith. He moved forward, bolstered by the insights he had absorbed during his dream. He started gathering and arranging the necessary equipment inside the forge. He stood with an air of confidence and resolve. He realized how ridiculous the scenario was, as if someone expected a patient to mix their own medicine and gather the needles themselves. He felt a powerful urge to attempt forging himself. He had barely begun his job when it happened. When he struck the metal for the first time, he became certain that the information stored in his mind was genuine. All their efforts were unfolding with remarkable success. As Gi-sung observed quietly, his doubts slowly faded, replaced by awe as he saw a series of perfect hammer blows unfold before his eyes. Sung gazed at Mu-jin with admiration, his thoughts swirling with the realization that Mu-jin possessed an extraordinary talent, not just as a doctor, but as someone inherently gifted in blacksmithing, much like his own father who had devoted his life to shaping metal. Each strike of his hammer rang out with a crisp, melodic clarity, causing to marvel silently, as if he might be watching the legendary blacksmith reborn before his eyes. He realized that what he witnessed surpassed anything that could be explained by mere talent. He found himself utterly captivated by what was happening, eager to witness more of how the process unfolded. Every step was carefully completed, from shaping and refining the blade to creating the handle and sewing the sheath. Pictured the finished weapon forming clearly within his mind. Once he completed crafting a blade for practice, he passed the item to Gi-sung and instructed him to melt it. Gi-sung couldn't hide his surprise at the unusual request, but Mu-jin, unfazed, reassured him that this was merely a preliminary exercise and that the real challenge of making an authentic needle was about to begin. Sometime afterward, events shifted to the Tang family clinic. The governor's military escort underwent treatment using the innovative needle crafted by, and the experience left him in awe. To his surprise, there was a complete absence of pain. Amazingly, the ache in his back disappeared without warning. His co-workers urged him to hurry up with his work, eager for their turn to receive the same treatment. Before long, word of the incredible cure traveled across the entire city. Outside the clinic, a crowd of patients formed a lengthy line as they waited for their turn. The situation had become so difficult that visitors began to express frustration over their inability to secure an appointment. A mysterious elderly man quietly overheard their conversation. During the hectic morning rush, a self-important man attempted to bypass the lengthy queue, causing frustration among the other people patiently waiting their turn. He glared at them with frustration, demanding to know if they were unaware of his identity. Stepped outside, curious to discover what was causing all the noise. She quickly understood that a confrontation was imminent. The scene depicted a confrontation involving two individuals skilled in martial arts. The boastful man confronted his rival, declaring that he was ready to reveal his name if his opponent wished to know it. In a sudden burst of action, the confrontation erupted, and the man quickly sent his boastful rival crashing to the floor with just one powerful blow. Hurried over to care for the wounded man. He stared in disbelief, realizing that the blow had etched the phrase, "the eccentric doctor," into his flesh. He recognized that the assailant possessed exceptional martial arts skills, demonstrated by their precise strike that sliced just the skin while leaving the bones and muscles untouched. As the assailant made his exit, searched his memory, trying to remember when he had previously encountered the name, the eccentric doctor. The elderly man chastised his conceited rival, criticizing him for weeping and behaving immaturely even though he was an adult. He ridiculed the other boy, questioning how such a minor wound, one that would heal within days, could possibly cause him to faint. Just then, a wave of astonishment washed over. In a sudden rush, all his memories came flooding back. The man before him was not merely an odd physician. He had gained a far more fearsome reputation. People called him the Doctor Killer. His name was Lee. His thoughts drifted back to moments he had shared with his father. There were others who surpassed this doctor in skill throughout the region. Despite everything, he always resembled a sturdy tree with roots that ran deep into the earth. He had gained his understanding of what it truly meant to be a doctor by observing the model who inspired him. Came to understand that Lee embodied everything that contradicted his father's values. He remembered the whispers that followed him wherever he went. People believed he ranked among the top 3 doctors in the world and had achieved the highest level of martial arts mastery. An unusual man used both his sword and his knowledge of medicine to determine the destinies of others. He committed his crimes without caring whether his actions were right or wrong. Worst of all, he had murdered countless innocent doctors, making him a notorious serial killer. A wave of fear washed over as he discovered that his father's life was at risk. Lee made a sudden, swift movement. He headed in the direction of his father's training room, let out a desperate scream and rushed after him, determined not to be left behind. Just as he was about to move, someone reached out and halted his actions. Jin Song, who served as an instructor for the Ching Ching sect, stood there. Those nearby questioned the sect leader's silence, but someone had already warned him that the coming events could not be prevented. Jinsong went on to share that not even his own master dared to challenge the eccentric doctor, hinting at the doctor's formidable reputation. He then unveiled a surprising truth. His master's life had once been saved by that very same doctor. Could hardly believe that the ruthless murderer was actually the person responsible for rescuing the leader of the sect. Overwhelmed by hopelessness, he collapsed onto his knees. Jinsong offered comfort by explaining that, although Li had some unusual habits, he did not possess a wicked nature. At the same time, Li stepped into the room that belonged to Mu Jin's father, let out a relieved breath as he noticed his father stood unscathed, and the attacker's clothing remained spotless. Without warning, Li stepped into view and seized him. After his conversation with Dr. Tang, he learned of a talented blacksmith in the area and had arrived specifically to seek him out. Li seized by the arm and questioned him about the location of the talented blacksmith. Startled by the sudden inquiry, admitted that he was aware of where to find the craftsman. Li instructed the boy to show the path, then pulled him close under his arm and strode forward together. The young man's face drained of color as his eyes widened in fear at the sight of Li's weapon. The second person urged him to hurry, explaining that he had other matters to attend to. Responded without hesitation, carrying out the request right away. Upon their arrival at the workshop, Li wanted Gi-sung to verify whether this boy had actually created the needle, and Gi-sung confirmed that he had. Li couldn't hold back and erupted with a booming laugh. He reflected on the unusual tales he'd heard about Sichuan, but even those stories couldn't compare to the idea of a doctor's child becoming a blacksmith. Once he regained his composure, he explained that the creator of the needles was unimportant and requested that craft an additional 30 acupuncture needles. He proceeded to produce a gold ingot, offering it as a down payment. And Gi-sung were taken aback by what they saw, expressed deep gratitude, and assured that the needles would be finished before the sun went down. Li was taken aback, unable to hide his astonishment. He questioned how anyone could accomplish that task in the present day, considering even the most talented blacksmiths required months to complete a similar commission. His eyes sparkled with excitement as he clutched the gold, assuring everyone with confidence that he would complete the task before the day ended. Li harbored doubts, believing that words were driven by selfish desires rather than honesty. The young man assured everyone, brimming with certainty, that he would complete the task before the day ended. Just moments prior to when began, Li rested his hand on the hilt of his sword, a silent warning of the threat he posed. She cautioned him, making it clear that he needed to fulfill his promise. Got to work as Li observed him closely, evaluating every move he made. They reflected on how challenging and precise the process of crafting acupuncture needles must be. He was determined to witness firsthand whether the young man's talent truly existed. While observing himself, he realized his physique was surprisingly fit, a sharp contrast to the typical appearance of most physicians. Started to speak. The person struck the metal rapidly, each blow landing in quick succession. The phrase and superior skill could be rewritten as demonstrating exceptional talent and expertise. Before the sun dipped below the horizon, fulfilled his promise by handing over the 30 completed needles to Li. After examining the items with great attention, he turned to, and to his astonishment, proposed that train under him as his student. Questioned his reasons for wanting to make him a disciple. Li responded by expressing his belief that dedicating his life to being a doctor in a small town would be a waste. Paused for a moment, admitting that responsibilities at the clinic required his attention. He had only begun to find joy in blacksmithing and felt uncertain about what lessons he might gain from the other man. Li let out a laugh. He explained that he had 2 lessons to offer him. Inquired about their identity. Without realizing, Li carefully slipped several needles into his back. He declared his intention to instruct Gi-sung in both martial arts and medicine. As the needles were removed, Gi-sung experienced an unexpected sense of relief, and at that moment, a mold resting on the table broke apart. Understood just how significant the chance in front of him truly was. The opportunity arose to gain knowledge from one of the top 3 legendary physicians, who was also renowned as a master of martial arts. He realized that Li's intimidating reputation would likely discourage anyone from targeting his family's clinic. Not even the Qing sect would risk causing them trouble. Despite everything, he inquired about the true motivation behind the proposal. Lee clarified that their arrangement was based on shared advantages. He appreciated the ease of journeying alongside a talented and quick-working blacksmith, and as compensation, he planned to offer lessons in martial arts and medicine. Was told that he could consider their arrangement a contractual relationship if it helped him feel at ease. Lee decided to assess his knowledge by presenting him with a challenging question about medicine. Gave the right response, prompting his future master to announce that had successfully completed the test. He clarified that the ability to remember intricate classical medical writings demonstrated the intelligence needed to study martial arts. Physical power by itself could never suffice. No matter how hard they worked to improve, those lacking wisdom always stayed at the bottom. His eyes sparkled with anticipation as he wondered aloud whether achieving the status of a first-rate fighter was within his reach. Lee explained that a pupil's ability to outshine his teacher relies more on how well the teacher instructs than on the natural gifts of the student. The suggestion was made that, with his guidance, the student's abilities could grow without bounds. Felt completely assured and started imagining himself achieving the highest position. He hurried toward the clinic, eager to return as quickly as possible. The character appeared completely overwhelmed by happiness. He expressed his regret to his father for not arriving on time. He did not expect his father to pull him into a firm embrace. He admitted to himself that fear had gripped him the moment he learned the unusual doctor was the one who had taken him. His father, filled with worry, questioned whether his son was okay, and reassured him that he was unharmed. The father went on to explain that, at first, when Lee had arrived in the training room, he had assumed Lee was simply someone interested in watching, not someone as threatening as the stories had suggested. He mentioned that Jin Song had comforted him earlier and expressed his relief at seeing his son unharmed. Curiosity in his voice, he wondered aloud about their delay, since he had assumed they would simply visit the blacksmith and return quickly. Excitedly shared the astonishing development with his father, explaining that Lee had offered to take him on as a disciple, and that he needed to make his decision by the following night. Lee's father thought it was unusual and rather odd for Lee to present such an unexpected proposal. While they strolled along, the father suddenly came to a halt. Felt a wave of concern, yet his father hurried away without hesitation. The character left quickly and came back just as swiftly. He passed a handful of silver coins to him. She informed him that he needed to leave. Felt a jolt of surprise at his father's request, reminding him that the clinic was already struggling with too few workers. He attempted to avoid accepting the offer by insisting that Lee must have been making a joke at his expense. His father interrupted, assuring him that the clinic would manage without him. He realized this could be his one opportunity to escape. At that instant, came to a fresh understanding. Throughout his life, he had viewed his father as a sturdy tree standing watch over their village. Hearing his father speak, he suddenly understood that his father, too, had once been a boy. He harbored aspirations unique to himself. Once had chosen his path, his travels with Lee commenced. By the second day of martial arts instruction, managed to direct chi energy through his body for the very first time. Over the next few days, he found himself swept up in feelings that were completely unfamiliar to him. The chi energy steadily increased inside him, and with each passing moment, he sensed his strength rising, as though he had advanced to a new level. He found himself deep in thought about his father. Lee wondered aloud whether Mu Jin was already missing home, but Mu Jin shook his head, insisting that he was not. He informed his master that he had sensed a noticeable increase in his ki compared to the previous day. Lee remarked that this phase of mastering martial arts brought the most joy. While believed he possessed a natural gift, his master explained that his progress in harnessing energy was, in reality, just ordinary. Objected, insisting that he had managed to master energy circulation in only 2 days, even though most people needed 10 days to accomplish the same feat. He credited his swift improvement to a dream about, convinced that the dream had bestowed upon him a special gift for fighting. Lee chose to put his self-assurance to the test. She offered to show him the fundamentals of sword fighting. He confronted the man and declared that if the man could even manage to touch the edge of his robe, he would acknowledge his skill. He planned to carry on his back until they made it out of Sichuan province. At first, was unsure, reminding him that the sword he held was sharp and dangerous. He considered the abilities he had worked hard to develop and wondered if they might give him a real shot at victory. The training session started, and chose to catch his master off guard by initiating an unexpected assault. Lee appeared unfazed by the situation, and with a hint of sarcasm, remarked on the other's decision to strike first, questioning whether the person truly believed 10 days was enough time to develop both bravery and skill. Launched into an aggressive assault, he gripped his sword tightly and put all his strength into a powerful swing, aiming to break the wooden staff cleanly in a single strike. He was astonished to see that, when his blade collided with Lee's wooden staff, it failed to leave even the slightest mark. In response, his master directed a flow of energy through the staff, experienced an overwhelming surge of power. The force surged forward with the intensity of a swift river after heavy rain. The force sent him sprawling to the ground and hurled him a great distance. His first encounter with the force of Qi left him overwhelmed by frustration. The character expressed frustration, feeling that the situation was unjust and believing that battles were merely contests to see who possessed greater. Lee admitted that his own reserves were limited, so he usually steered clear of direct confrontations, emphasizing that martial arts involved much more than just raw power. Observing his students, he grew curious about the reasons behind their evident annoyance. The thought of ever making it to the top seemed impossible if this was the only way success was measured. Lee struck the man's head with the staff. He clarified that mastering martial arts was far from easy, emphasizing that numerous paths existed to achieve mastery, even for those whose energy was not particularly strong. He noted that natural effort to combine his energy with his sword was promising, then encouraged to try attacking once more. He assured them that he would avoid using on this occasion, refused to surrender, and resolved to make another attempt. He launched another assault. This time she managed to slice through Lee's staff. However, his master responded with a quick and decisive move, turning the tables in an instant. The blow rendered him unconscious in an instant. After regained consciousness, it was observed that, had this been a real fight, would have perished 3 times during the exchange, even without the use of energy. Lee evaluated his abilities with accuracy, explaining that his energy gathering and release speed fell within the typical range and did not stand out as remarkable. Despite his swordsmanship remaining below average, his superior acknowledged his abilities, noting how accurately he sensed the key and how swiftly and skillfully he applied it. He naturally combined his energy with his sword, allowing him to compete with fighters who were at least second-rate or higher. Lee finished his evaluation, noting that achieving such impressive results in just 10 days of training was remarkable. Felt a surge of excitement at the compliment, and began to question whether he had already reached the level of a second-rate fighter. Lee cast a scornful glance at the other man, but before either could react further, the sharp noise of something snapping underfoot echoed from the dense bushes nearby. Initially assumed the noise came from a wild animal, yet Lee clarified that it was actually caused by a person moving on 2 legs. As they spent time in the forest, the sound of footsteps signaled to them that someone was drawing near. Lee observed that the man's belt was tied with 3 distinct knots. The person was instantly recognized as a branch leader, catching off guard as he understood they were up against a top-level martial artist. The man identified himself as San, who served as the branch leader of village. He went on to share that he was searching for a doctor because a strange and fatal illness had begun to affect people in his village. On their way to the village, San began to share the tale of his misfortune. About a month earlier, the illness had begun to spread. At first, the villagers believed it was just a common cough that came with the changing seasons. However, the illness quickly swept through the community, affecting half of the population and resulting in the deaths of 20 people. He made it clear that leaving his village was not an option for him. He and his master remained behind to care for those who were ill. The villagers explained that the local doctor had gone out to gather additional medicinal plants, yet he still had not come back. San expressed gratitude to Lee and for assisting him. When they reached the village, the group encountered the guardians stationed at the entrance. They were quickly escorted indoors. The purpose was to visit a patient. Turned his attention toward him, carefully observing his every detail. He observed that the patient's heartbeat was faint and fast. Beads of sweat covered his skin, and his body felt hot in some areas and cool in others. Once they discovered that the patient had experienced episodes of vomiting as well. He determined that the signs pointed to the presence of a plague. Lee inquired about the exact nature of his condition and the recommended course of treatment. described the sickness as being similar to a feverish summer flu, but he stressed that it was unique in its own way. He cautioned that, without medical attention, the intense heat trapped in the patient's head might result in lasting harm. To address this, suggested using acupuncture at multiple locations across the body and recommended a blend of particular medicinal herbs. Lee, after listening to the analysis, felt a deep sense of admiration and decided that the treatment should be started by him personally. Although anxiety bubbled inside, reached into his bag and retrieved a handful of acupuncture needles. It was the very first occasion that he attempted acupuncture on someone else. While he got ready, Lee gently rested his finger on a specific spot on the patient's foot, indicating where the needle should go. She reminded him that mastering Qi energy offered more than advantages in martial arts. It was also an invaluable gift for someone practicing medicine. With the support of his master's energy steering his actions, he pressed forward, experienced a sharpening of his awareness. Suddenly, he could clearly observe the movement of energy within the patient's body, yet at the same time, he detected a dark, ominous force that carried a sense of death. Lee acknowledged experiencing the same sensation and instructed him to proceed with the acupuncture, wanting to observe how the energy would respond to the therapy. Skillfully inserted the needles into precise spots on the body, showing a practiced hand. After a brief period, he completed his task and brushed the perspiration from his forehead. The medical team started keeping a close watch on the patient, expecting to see signs of recovery. Before long, he observed as the ominous shadow of death gradually faded away from the ailing child's form. His health quickly returned to normal. Let out a quiet breath, feeling the tension leave his body. Lee cut him off before he could finish. He reflected on how much he had learned throughout the day. Seeing the contented expression on his face showed that he had finally achieved what it meant to be a real doctor. While they made their way through the village, the patient's father began recounting the tale of the village doctor who had disappeared. He spoke of with warmth, emphasizing the doctor's kindness and good nature. As illness swept through the area, the doctor used up all the money he had saved to purchase costly medicinal herbs from traders. Upon learning of his actions, the villagers gathered their own funds and handed them over to the doctor so he could buy even more herbs. Because merchants seldom came to their mountain village, Doctor had ventured into the mountains alone to look for herbs that could serve as temporary remedies. However, he had not come back since that day. The man showed how thankful he was to them, his appreciation clear in both his words and actions. She welcomed them into her home, inviting them to stay as her guests. They arrived at the place where they were staying. Lee felt a surge of emotion upon realizing that every trace of possession had vanished from the house. Wondered aloud to his master whether the village doctor could be trusted, and his master responded that they would discover the truth upon meeting the man themselves. Discovered that the villagers had provided them with meals and presents before departing. Lee observed the generosity of their hosts and instructed his disciple to take just a small portion of the food, making sure to give back the leftovers so they would not trouble their benefactors. As they ate, Lee turned to, seeking his thoughts about the illness. He confessed that, while he was aware of comparable diseases, this particular case felt unusual and could be entirely new to him. Meanwhile, Lee dismissed the notion that even the top 3 physicians possessed complete knowledge. She pointed out to him that the amount he didn't understand was much greater than what he already knew, and she added that if he were familiar with every illness, he wouldn't have any need to journey across the country. Grew more interested, and wondered aloud whether the man was looking for a remedy for a particular illness. Lee, his voice heavy with sorrow, explained that he had long hoped to find a cure for a particular illness, and now he finally understood how to heal it. However, the moment had already passed. While they sat together without speaking, the quiet was broken by the distant sounds of weeping and grief that drifted from the village. Suggested that medicine should be used, yet the real issue was that no one had figured out what the illness was. They mentioned that understanding the issue would allow them to solve it. At that moment, Lee shared the tragic personal experience that motivated his journey. He revealed that both his wife and daughter had lost their lives to a sickness. Lee went on with his sorrowful tale, describing the day his wife and daughter suddenly became ill with a severe fever and red rashes, despite his efforts to seek out the best medical experts for their care. Nobody had discovered a remedy, and while he continued his frantic hunt for a different physician, his family passed away merely 3 days afterward. Heart filled with sorrow, and he longed to offer a prayer for those involved. However, Lee intervened, assuring him that the situation was not as heartbreaking as it seemed. There was even a chance that he would see the humor in it. He went on to explain what happened after he lost them. He wandered away from his, without a clear direction or purpose. He spent 10 days traveling before finally arriving at a quiet village. At that place, he encountered a doctor whose demeanor raised suspicion, so he proceeded to explain his family's symptoms to the man. The doctor handed him a vial of medicine, promising that, for 5 coins, it would provide a cure. Lee referred to the situation as a comedic misfortune. During that period, he was the owner of a substantial wealth in silver bars. He now possessed enough money to cover the expenses of his daughter's wedding many times. His family's lives were not lost due to poverty or insufficient medicine. Instead, their fate was sealed because the experienced physicians he turned to were missing the basic insight that this humble doctor had. The event inspired him to pursue a career in medicine and embark on a journey around the globe, determined to collect every piece of medical wisdom he could find. Sorrow weighed heavily on him as he admitted that, after 3 decades, the faces of his wife and daughter had faded from his memory. Then, almost unexpectedly, laughter escaped him. The sound of laughter echoed in his ears, blending with the distant cries drifting in from outside. Feeling inspired by the tale, declared his intention to explore the village in hopes of discovering what was causing the illness. Lee nodded in agreement, and the group split up, each choosing a separate path to search. Started his search by looking into the common locations where outbreaks usually start. She thought about places such as the dirty pig pen and the old well. However, he was unable to detect any sign of the deadly force responsible for spreading sickness. He made his way toward the home where the elderly man lived. The illness first appeared in the village when one person became sick. Considered how illnesses caused by heat were not the same as those brought on by cold. He remembered that cold sicknesses tended to lower the body's temperature, whereas hot ones made it rise. However, both originated from a lethal that emerged in a shadowy, frigid location, a place he had yet to discover despite all his searching. He clarified that epidemics tend to move outward from where they first began. She inquired whether the illness had first affected this man, and then spread to those living nearby. While conducting his investigation, discovered that the illness was advancing more rapidly in the western section of the village compared to the eastern side, and he also realized that children were at a higher risk of being affected. He found himself confused by the strange pattern, as it didn't match the way epidemics usually spread. He questioned in his mind what set the west side of the village apart from the east, and found himself troubled by how quickly the children were falling ill. At that moment, the village guard shared important news with him, revealing that the children from the village frequently spent time playing in the riverbed on the western side of town. Using the clues available, concluded that the illness could be linked to the water. Although he had already inspected the well in the eastern village and confirmed it was uncontaminated, confusion lingered in his mind. Seeking clarity, he inquired of the village guard about the possibility of the eastern well ever running out of water. The guard explained that the well sometimes ran dry for brief stretches during the spring's dry season. Hearing this, realized the truth when the guard admitted that the outbreak had started just as the well had lost its water. He understood that the empty well had left everyone no choice but to draw water from the river to the west, which clarified why people living nearby, especially the children, became ill before anyone else. Together, they made their way toward the river. At first, the water seemed both clear and free of any smell. Chose an alternative approach to evaluate it. He carefully lifted the glass, letting the cool water touch his lips as he drank it at an unhurried pace. The character lowered themselves to the ground and closed their eyes, focusing their mind in deep meditation. He drew upon his inner energy. He wanted to look inside his own body. The presence of that same ominous death energy washed over them. A sense that he had once noticed in the patient started to take root inside him. After realizing the water was tainted, he abruptly rose to his feet and declared that he had uncovered the reality of the situation. They began making their way in the direction of the water source, became aware of an unusual scent lingering in the air. Their progress caused the sensation to intensify. He sensed that they were nearing the origin of the sound. The group trailed the lingering aroma, eventually arriving at a place where the trees stood lifeless and the earth beneath their feet decayed. He noticed that the ground had been disturbed in several spots, as if someone had recently dug into the soil and then covered it back up. They noticed that everything surrounding them was slowly falling apart. He began to suspect that the real origin of the sickness lay hidden deep underground. At that moment, began to weigh his options in his mind. He was reminded of the unpleasant scent that always lingered in the herb storage room at his father's clinic. Despite being filled with the remains of both plants and animals, the herb room always carried a soothing fragrance. The symbol embodied death, yet within it lay the secret to life. Instead of life, the air in this place carried only the stench of death. The air carried a stench that signaled only more tragedy to come, while thoughts circled about who had caused this and why. Instructed the villagers to assist him in unearthing the soil and relocating whatever lay hidden beneath it to a spot distant from the river. As they started to dig, they uncovered fragments of an object that appeared to have been purposefully cut into pieces and hidden underground. Came to understand that the item hidden underground was the origin of corpse poison, a dangerous substance known for inflicting a lingering and agonizing sickness on anyone who encountered it. In contrast to toxins derived from plants which cause immediate death, this substance acted differently. He realized the culprit possessed expert knowledge, fully aware of every characteristic of this poison. The group stumbled upon a deep hole overflowing with the remains of butchered animals. The true scheme finally revealed itself. Someone had deliberately contaminated the river just as the well emptied. Their objective was to completely destroy the village and leave nothing behind. Without warning, Doctor, who had been missing, showed up in front of them. He demanded, with frustration in his voice, to know why anyone would trespass on the land he had worked so hard to cultivate. The moment he arrived, the villagers instantly knew who he was. In a flash of realization, pieced everything together. He saw how expertise with toxins, his understanding of the village's water supply issues, and his habit of taking money from worried villagers all fit into a single scheme. Raising his voice, announced to everyone that Doctor was behind it all. Perceived the smiling Doctor not as a mere person, but as a monster wearing a human face. A surge of anger welled up inside her as she witnessed his selfishness and bold disrespect. Despite the truth coming to light, the situation remained unchanged. Overwhelmed by intense rage, he felt an uncontrollable urge to strangle the other man with his own hands. The village guard approached him with anger, alleging that he had caused the illness and was now pretending to heal others just to earn money. Confessed with a composed demeanor, he had always shown kindness, simply hoping to receive his portion when everything was settled. Shouted directly at him, her voice rising sharply. He wondered aloud what portion the other person meant, especially since so many lives had already been lost. Without warning, 2 additional men emerged at his side. Responded in a detached manner, expressing indifference toward those who had passed away. The only thing that concerned him was the fact that his plans had been destroyed by their actions. They were about to suffer the consequences through physical punishment. He went on to disclose his true plan. All along, he had decided to murder them and dispose of their bodies in the very same pit. They teased the others, suggesting they had simply shown up early to meet their own downfall. The villagers, overwhelmed by fury, themselves for battle. His companion observed the unique pattern of knots tied into spelt. At that instant, revealed who he truly was, his voice trembling with anger as he made it known that he was the beggar, the one who harvested hemp, and a member of the beggar's sect's guards. And his companion were taken aback by the unexpected event. Doctor and the person with him froze in shock when they learned who truly was. His companion questioned inwardly how a guard from the beggar's sect had found his way into the village, since he had always assumed that only frail and powerless people lived there. Remained silent, unable to respond. Stepped forward at a measured pace and declared that he would begin counting to 10. The explanation was given that Doctor was the sole person who truly deserved death. He expressed his desire to avoid further violence, urging the others to choose wisely. He started counting, beginning with the number 1. Stood in awe as demonstrated an incredible ability, immobilizing his enemies with nothing more than a powerful shout. At that instant, San looked toward and urgently instructed him to escape without delay. Could hardly believe it when he was instructed to run away by himself. Explained his strategy, intending to hurl the other person over the river. He was told to hurry to the village and warn everyone as quickly as he could, with strict instructions not to glance behind him. While kept counting, expressed regret for making him take on this responsibility. objected, questioning why he had to be the one to run when both, as a branch leader and himself as a guard, were peak masters fully capable of managing things themselves. In that moment, he suddenly understood the terrible reality. Although their impressive titles suggested otherwise, the true extent of their power fell short of expectations. They were not the unrivaled masters he had imagined them to be. Sun explained to him that he was expected to stand by his master's side in battle. His followers, upon discovering that their opponents were merely impoverished individuals and a physician, made the choice to launch an assault. Notice the fierce resolve shining in his gaze, realizing that was prepared to battle until his last breath. He found himself puzzled by the beggar's willingness to risk everything for the sake of the village, despite his frail condition. He proposed that they flee as a group, believing that once they reached the village, Li, renowned as a true peak master, would be able to shield them from harm. Intervened, pointing out that their abilities were insufficient, and that they wouldn't be able to keep him safe if they tried to run away. She pleaded with him to join Li in defending the village. Recounted a lifetime spent as a beggar in the village, yet, because of the villagers' compassion, never once experienced any sense of shame. Their master had once instructed them about what to do when the moment finally arrived. They realized it was their duty to protect the villagers through battle. While the countdown pressed on, soldiers surged ahead, launching their assault. Driven by a fierce resolve, the character set out with the intention to end life. In a last act of selflessness, carried out the strategy. The fighters closed in on, determined to defeat him as swiftly as possible. Was hurled a great distance away from the ongoing battle. People around him began to shout urgently, telling him he needed to escape. As soared above the ground, his thoughts churned with inner conflict over the commands he had received. He found himself curious about the fate awaiting the beggars. He considered returning to assist his friends, convinced that their opponents were not very powerful. They realized that uniting their strengths could give them a chance at victory. Once they reached the opposite bank of the river, he glanced over his shoulder and realized the battle was already, where both and Sun had been swiftly overwhelmed and defeated. He broke into a run. He struggled to reassure himself that escaping had not been a mistake. He simply followed their instructions in hopes of protecting the village. Despite his initial attempts to justify his actions, he quickly realized that his excuses were unfounded and that his decision to flee was simply because he was afraid. He understood that the beggars would not survive. Despite having only recently started learning martial arts, he was overwhelmed by a sense of helplessness. He longed to be a peak master, believing that if he held such a title, he would have stood his ground instead of running away. Came to a halt, his thoughts lingering on the bravery displayed by the beggars. Despite knowing how frail they were, they still decided to risk everything and battle until the very end. He realized he needed to return and offer his assistance. A memory surfaced in his mind of a time long ago, when he had stepped in to protect a child who was being bullied. He had once endured a harsh beating, yet a sense of pride filled him for behaving bravely. Remembering that moment, he contrasted it with the fear and hesitation he felt now, anxious that the confrontation might end before he arrived. He understood that escaping now would mean spending the rest of his life on the run. He hurried in the direction of the ongoing fight, and upon reaching the scene, he discovered that both and San had suffered serious injuries. She was worn out and found herself in an extremely dangerous predicament. Summoned the last reserves of his energy. The person yelled that even a trapped dog will show its teeth in defiance. The character managed to stop an assault launched by one of his followers. Just in time, the character narrowly avoided the follow-up strike. The attacker looked at him with a mocking smile, clearly unimpressed by how determined he remained. He himself to strike the decisive blow, daring his opponents to reveal how they might escape from this dire predicament. As hurried back, the fight neared its sorrowful end. In a swift and deadly move, one of his followers struck Sun, causing him to collapse onto the ground, fatally wounded. His master called out to him in a voice filled with emotion. She attempted to encourage him to rise. One of the assailants ridiculed how much he cared about his student. Responded by insisting he preferred using underhanded methods to survive instead of facing death. She believed this was a much better choice compared to the wickedness shown by Doctor and his followers. The assailants kept jeering at him, urging him to give up, while menacingly claiming they would dismember his followers and use their remains as fertilizer. Looked at his opponents with a mocking expression, making it clear through his defiant stance that he had no intention of giving up. The attacker, furious after hearing the insults, lost control and launched a series of reckless assaults. Despite his efforts, their strength far surpassed his own, allowing them to subdue him with little difficulty. Resorted to his last remaining strategy. He swiftly avoided the blow and grabbed some dirt from the ground. At that instant, memories of times spent with his disciple flooded his mind, while he weighed the possibility of giving up his own life. The dirt was suddenly flung into one of their faces. The character sprang forward and gripped him firmly, making sure he couldn't escape. Observing that his master was in imminent danger of being killed, summoning the remainder of his fading energy, called out for his disciple with a desperate cry. The servant recognized the sound of his master's voice calling out. The assailant drove the blade into him multiple times. Clung with determination, his final moments filled with the resolve that he must finally return the favor he owed the villagers. Just then rushed forward and lunged at the fighter whom his master had restrained. After died, another warrior appeared, approaching from behind. At the same time, arrived at the scene of the fight and hurled a stone that struck the warrior. The warrior glared at, blaming him for everything that had happened. Gathered all his strength and aimed a powerful strike at his adversary. He succeeded in taking him out. One of the few men still loyal to Spotted as he came back. He became frustrated because he realized he had not escaped. She shouted at him, accusing him of having a death wish, before charging straight toward him with a fierce promise to slice him apart. At the critical moment when faced certain defeat, Lee made an unexpected entrance onto the battlefield. In the span of a heartbeat, the final warrior had already been defeated. Stood surrounded by the lifeless bodies of his fallen foes. Lee came upon San, who was crying beside his fallen master. He softly inquired whether these individuals were responsible for the wrongdoing. Shook his head in refusal and gestured toward Doctor, revealing him as the real mastermind. With practiced ease, Lee reached out and seized Doctor. The assailant shoved him down until he was kneeling on the ground. The question was raised, wondering whether he was responsible for bringing about the plague. His temper flared beyond control as he lashed out at who was kneeling before him. His foot struck forcefully, and his voice rose in frustration, demanding to know what could possibly drive someone to go to such lengths just for the sake of money. Dropped to his knees, desperately pleading for forgiveness. Lee soon understood that wealth was not the man's genuine goal, so he pressed him to reveal his actual intentions. Upon discovering that his adversary possessed greater knowledge than he had revealed, quickly adjusted his strategy and presented an invaluable bribe in hopes of securing his own survival. The fabled black peony herb. Upon hearing the name, felt a surge of shock course through him. Lee informed his disciple that the herb before them was a prized rarity, renowned as the flower of heroes. It thrived exclusively in locations where the air was thick with the essence of death. Guided the group toward a cave, inside which the flower was blooming. Had already become aware of its presence. Filled with urgency, extended the offer to them, hoping they would accept. Grew even more furious with himself for acting so timidly. Lee exposed the true strategy, explaining to that never planned to negotiate in order to save himself. He understood that if anyone without special abilities attempted to touch the black peony, its lethal power would claim their life in an instant. The true intention behind his actions was to exploit the bodies of the villagers for his own sinister purposes. Besides using both of their bodies, they continued to care for the flower, providing everything it needed until it finally blossomed. Shook his head and insisted that he had planned to make it for them using a unique method. Lee doubted that someone from a small village could possess such vast knowledge. He then announced that he, too, was not just an ordinary individual. With unwavering confidence, he extended his hand and grasped the toxic flower directly, picking it without any protection. The sight filled with fear, since contact with it was believed to bring instant death. Once Lee had defeated Doctor, he loomed above his own lifeless form, proclaiming his authority to determine the fate of others. He made it clear just how much he despised dishonest doctors such as himself. Some people think that just studying medicine is enough to become a real doctor. Filled with concern, questioned himself about whether his actions had been the correct choice. His master responded with a mocking tone, emphasizing his infamous reputation as the doctor killer. He instructed the other person to care for the wounded and step aside. As he got ready to draw out the lingering poisons from both the bodies, and the black peony. The character lowered themselves to the ground, folding their legs comfortably beneath them. Gazed at his master, his eyes wide with astonishment. He channeled his to extract every trace of poisonous death energy from both the earth and the flower. He drew the energy into himself. The strength of the poison was overwhelming, nearly dragging along with its force. Toxic, deadly energy started swirling around Li, forming a dark, cloud-like shroud. Once the toxic mist slowly started to dissipate, he had already made sure the place was spotless. Li clarified to his student that the phenomenon observed had indeed been a display of true energy control. He proceeded to offer the black peony flower to him. Once it had been cleansed and made harmless, he explained that the flower rightfully belonged to him, since he had been the one to expose Doctor's scheme. Did not feel pleased when he received the present. Observing Jo-san, who was hurt, he declined the present, insisting that he did not deserve it in any way. He admitted to fleeing and explained that he came back solely because he feared others would think him a coward. Li wondered aloud about which qualifications the other person meant. Wondered aloud how San could consider him capable for the task. Li responded thoughtfully, clarifying that escaping obvious danger does not make someone a coward. Rather, it is unwise not to run when necessary. He explained that coming back after running away proved to be far more difficult than confronting danger directly. In the end, what truly counted was that he had chosen not to abandon his responsibilities. Felt a surge of emotion well up inside him as he listened to his master's heartfelt speech. Li averted his gaze, a playful thought crossing his mind about whether he had just shared advice so deep that it might have gone over the other person's head. Once Li handed the pure flower to Mu-jin wasted no time and ate it right away. His master's eyes widened in surprise before his expression shifted to anger as he questioned his decision to eat it at that moment. Meanwhile, stared back in confusion, uncertain whether he had made a mistake by eating it. Li reprimanded him, pointing out that it was reckless to consume such a potent elixir without first understanding the correct way to harness its power. Upon arriving back at the village, Li quickly set about instructing in the intricate technique, a specialized method of breathing and movement designed to help properly harness the flower's energy. He was instructed to remain steady and concentrate. Once the instructions had been understood, he started honing his skills as he walked along. At first, he faced significant difficulties. Li noticed a surge of chi energy emanating from his own body. Before long, sensed a surge of incredible strength coursing throughout his entire body. Before arriving at the village, Li resolved to collect all his strength. Felt satisfied with how much energy he had managed to extract. His master gently curbed his excitement, explaining that the sensation he experienced represented only a fraction of the flower's real strength, and urging him to persist in his training. When they arrived back in village, they brought with them who was badly hurt. The villagers welcomed them with radiant smiles and an outpouring of happiness. Stood before the crowd, his reputation as a hero firmly established in their minds. He assured everyone that the end of the plague was near and carefully explained how to make an herbal remedy that promised to heal them all within 3 days. Remained apart from the others, lost in sorrow as he continued to mourn his master. Li realized that the loss of his master had deeply affected him. Expressed appreciation by signaling to the group with a gesture. Afterward, the person slipped away from the scene without drawing any attention. After a while, as supervised the care being given to the ill, he spent time honing his martial arts skills. He studied the directions his master had given him with focused attention. Li frowned and questioned whether he was worried about dust contaminating the medicine, wondering if this was just an excuse to argue for sword training. He instructed the other person to get ready to depart, paused, savoring the attention that came with being seen as a hero, and proposed that they remain in the area a little longer. Li declined the request, stating that he was in the village solely to help. It was then disclosed that had departed the night before. The news left stunned. Li explained that after laying the dead to rest, had probably gone back to his old ways, wandering the land as a beggar once more. Was confused by the situation, prompting his master to clarify that beggars who are compelled to take a life often face such outcomes. The master further explained that, regardless of whether their reasons are righteous, this is the unyielding rule of their sect. Once had departed, Li observed that when a beggar takes a life, their actions can no longer be considered mere begging. However, it transforms into a gesture of respect or an act meant to seek forgiveness. This was the reality of taking a life. When wondered aloud about what lay ahead for him, his master explained that deciding his own destiny was a choice only San could make. Later, after the village had healed from its troubles, and Lee said goodbye to the grateful villagers, who expressed their appreciation with heartfelt thanks. Throughout their travels, realized they had reached a graveyard. They came upon who was on his knees in front of a newly dug grave. He, along with his teacher, participated in honoring those who had passed away. Hadn't expected his master to get involved, so the decision caught him off guard. He turned around to find standing right behind him. The beggar, having managed to survive the confrontation, expressed deep gratitude toward Lee for his assistance, sincerely acknowledging that he was now greatly indebted to him. Realized that had gone without food since the night before. He decided to share his meal with him. He wanted to know what the other planned to do, and learned that the man intended to remain in the village because he had no other place to go. Surviving at all costs defined what it meant to live as a beggar. Inspired by the beggar's courageous end, and reflecting on Lee's insights regarding the consequences of taking a life, a deep sense of emotion welled up within her. Quickly came to a conclusion, and invited to travel with them on their adventure. They assured him that they would bring him to a place where he could experience true freedom, explaining that this was also the wish of his late master. Approached his master and requested approval to allow to accompany them. Without hesitation, the person firmly grasped his arm and guided him to stand behind his master. Expressed his disappointment toward Lee, upset that he had been left behind without any explanation. Observed that his master seemed to be rushing. He consented to allow to become part of their group. Now that the team had come together, looked forward to advancing his skills. Eager for guidance, he approached Lee with a request to learn sword techniques. Wondered aloud where they would be heading next. A thought crossed his mind one he had never considered before. At that moment Lee announced where they were headed, the city of Luoyang.